morning. First of all, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Erick Brown. I work with UK Trade and Investment in the USA. I'm based out of New York. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the US education market, kind of a basics 101, if you would, understanding, if there can be an understanding of the market for UK companies that are probably new to the market. Maybe you're just starting to get there. Maybe you do have a little bit of business there, but you're looking to expand more. And then please, if you have questions, feel free to just raise your hand. I want to make it as interactive as possible. Also, just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll all see the clipboards here with the review forms. If you could just please fill those out, that'd be great. Really appreciate it from everybody here. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Again, talking about a little bit about the US education market. Some basics, if you would. So there's approximately 125,000 primary and secondary schools in the US. Oftentimes, primary schools most commonly are referred to as elementary schools in the US. And the largest districts, or sometimes the most commonly approached districts, New York City schools, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami-Dade County, Clark County, which is in Las Vegas. Miami-Dade is the city of Miami and in the surrounding area. Unlike in other parts of the world where there may be some structures that are very common amongst decision-making with schools, in the US it's going to be very fragmented. And we're going to talk about that throughout the course of my conversation today, about how you're going to have to navigate the market or try to understand the market, which there's no right way, there's no golden key answer to how to do things. It's basically going to be looking at it in case-by-case studies and areas depending on where you're looking to go in the country. So I'm going to pause this for a second and actually take a step back. Is anybody here already doing business in the US? 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so a decent number. Those of you that have not yet can just kind of shout it out. What's been some of the barriers that you've been seeing or concerns that you've had? Nothing? Okay. Basically, based on what you're saying, I want to try to kind of gear what I'm going to talk about to try to answer or give information around that as best as I possibly can. So just to take a step back to basics again, unlike public schools, obviously, you know, where the funding is going to come from the government, the private schools in the US are going to get their funding from tuition, they're going to get their funding from endowments, they're going to get their funding from outside sources. But overall, the funding for public schools is going to be coming from a couple of different areas. Local, state, and federal funding. A lot of times from UK companies, I get the question, well, you know, the US, the federal government did X, Y, or Z, as I should say here, around money going into schools. How's it going to affect us potentially? Oftentimes, the one thing that you need to think about is that federal funding is a microcosm in the amount of money that schools have. It's basically less than 10% for most schools in terms of how much money they get. A majority of the money they get is going to come from the local and the state level. Now, because of that federal funding being supplemental, a lot of that money is going around specific programs like special needs programs or different programs that are often politically instituted, if you would, so whatever political parties are in power at the time or whoever the decision makers are in time, whoever that president potentially could be, they might have different programs that their administration is going to be instituting. Race for the Top, No Child Left Behind. Those are some of the ones that are commonly been talked about over the years under different presidents. So as a school, when you're trying, as a company, when you're trying to sell to these different schools, you're going to have different decision-making that's going to be done by these districts. So oftentimes, the structure, depending on what your product is, sometimes if you have a product that might be sold directly to a teacher, some of these things that you have to go through, some of the loopholes that you might have to jump through are going to be lessened. If you're selling something that's maybe at a higher price point where it's a higher level of decision-making, then you're going to have to look at now potentially is it going to be something that's going to be the district that's going to be responsible for deciding that, or is it going to be something that a teacher can decide still, or is it going to be something that maybe a school's principal? In the UK, you guys have head teachers. In the US, the more common term would be a principal. The principal may be decision maker for that. So in those cases, you needing to be able to understand who your potential audience is going to be is one step, but the other step is understanding what the process is going to be that you might have to go through, such as becoming an approved vendor. So an approved vendor is basically you have to go through a process of applications to a district, get on a list, and usually have whatever your product or service is. You have a bidding process that you might have to go through that then gets you approved that now, okay, a district can say, you're an approved vendor, now my schools within the district can buy our product from you. Decision-making time, peak decision-making time is right around the corner in many cases for the US, which a lot of it's going to be done in March, April, May as the 2014-15 school budgets, that little money that may be left over for some schools, they're trying to decide what they can use because they don't obviously want to run out of the budget for the next year, so they want to make decisions for what they're going to have for 15-16, as well as preparing for 15-16's budget and making decisions in terms of what are the new products or services that they're going to implement for next year. I'm going to talk more about this, about schools not wanting to hear sales pitches, because that's something that I think a lot of UK companies, you're accustomed to the fact that you're working closely with schools. You probably have great relationships with the schools that you're working with here. And that's something where, granted, now if you're working with the US, your closest customer is going to be 3,000 miles away. It's going to be a little bit trickier to be able to have those same kind of relationships. But at the same time, you have to keep that in mind, is that your competition in the US does have those relationships, that regular contact with the schools, with the teachers, and it's something that you want to keep in mind in terms of what your potential approach to the market can be. Oftentimes, there's three things that have come up that teachers and schools and administrators all complain about, if you would, that they have issue with from vendors. And the first being that they don't take the time to ask what the teachers need. Oftentimes, they come with that one-size-fits-all, turnkey type product that they think, oh, you know what, I'll put this into the school, it's going to fix a problem, and everything's going to be great. Well, that may not be the case. Another time is that because it's that one-size-fits-all, sometimes, I don't have it up here, but another thing that I've heard recently is that sometimes companies come to a school trying to solve a problem that the school doesn't realize they have. And then what happens is they come with this great solution to this problem that they didn't realize they have, they sell it to the school, and then they step away, and now the school's sitting there trying to figure out how to use it. It gets used for maybe a month or two, and then it just gets put to the side, they ignore it, and they move on, and subsequently when it's time to renew, they don't, because this company didn't properly train the school on how to use it or maintain that relationship to show them how to effectively use the product. So training, in the US, customer service is key. It's huge in how we do things, and it's very important at the school level. As I talked about before, they don't want to just hear a sales pitch and then have somebody come to them and sell a product. They want someone that's going to be a partner to work with them around doing things. I've already had a couple meetings this morning and already had a conversation about the Common Core. I think the Common Core is one of the things that is very commonly talked about now, pardon the pun. So the Common Core is changes in the state curriculums for a majority of the country to try to bring some uniformity. For many years, the US has never had a uniformity around the curriculum. We still, for the most part, don't. The Common Core is coming into effect to hopefully be able to make some changes to that. The tricky part is, even when I was writing this initially, Texas, Alaska, Nebraska, Montana, Virginia, Puerto Rico is not a state, it's a territory of the US, but Puerto Rico, those are the areas that were not part of it. Subsequently, in recent months, now we've gotten other states that have stepped away from it. More states are starting to now say, hey, you know what, we're not so sure about this anymore. Now that people have become more aware of what it's going to be, there's been some concerns. Because the problem with the Common Core is that with the lack of uniformity with education in the states, you've had many states that have been up here with education, you've had others that are down there. The Common Core has had to create this. And for those states that have been up here, coming back, and the other ones getting up, it hasn't really been as seamless as it was envisioned when it was first implemented. So now you're getting some states that are pushing back. And unfortunately, what happens with education around the world, there are political agendas that now are tied to decision-making with what goes on with Common Core. So you are going to see, as this being now 2016 in the election, new president is going to be going into office in 2017, whatever his or her agenda is going to be, whatever their plan is going to be around education, it may change what's going to happen with Common Core. Even though Common Core isn't directly from the president, if you would, it is still tied in a way to what the overarching thought process is around education for the US. So it's something just to keep in mind in terms of what is going to be the political temperature, if you would, to where the Common Core is going to go. But at the same time, if you do have a product that is or tied to the curriculum in any kind of way, keeping an eye on the Common Core can make things a little bit more seamless for you as a UK company coming with a foreign product into the US market. To flip, oh yeah, please.
Yeah, I was saying, do you think that more and more states are going to move away from the Common Core? Is that your impression? It's going to keep becoming less important?
I think it's been kind of a lot of attention around the states that have stepped away recently. I think my own opinion is probably you're going to see a cooling in terms of people going away from it, and then maybe depending around election times and new governors coming into office, that's where you see like a lot of people jumping off of it. So it really just it kind of depends on the cycles of elections and seeing the changes in leadership in different states. So I can't say that I think it's just going to go away, if you would, but I do think that it's going to be in flux for a little while. So again, now to put it back on you guys, who here is working in any way in the higher education space at all? So higher ed, obviously in the US, is a market that is very attractive from the UK side because of the number of institutions that are there. It's a market that I think it's interesting to try to understand it because now, unlike working with primary and secondary schools where you can have districts that are making decisions, now you're going to get in a different area because now the state can be involved a little bit more, especially if you're looking at your two-year schools, which are usually what we call community colleges. Majority of them are part of a state network. So the state may be the decision maker for, depending on what your product is, almost like a district would. But, however, depending on where you are, there's a lot more autonomy in higher ed than you may find in K through 12 because of the fact that colleges are getting money from various different sources, obviously from the tuition, from the endowments and things like that, much like how a private school might run, as well as if they're a public school, as well as from the state. Actually, you know what? I want to touch a little bit more on higher ed. So when you're looking at the higher ed institutions and you're looking at colleges and what they're doing in the space and working there, some of the keys to think about, and I'm going to touch on it in the recommendations, and this is going to be education as a whole, but just some of the things to think about in terms of higher ed. In the US, each particular state has their own network of institutions. Now, the term college here has a different connotation than what it does in the US. A college here is sometimes more of a vocational school in the US. So colleges are typically, US-wide anyway, they are higher education institutions. So a college could be, like for instance, Dartmouth is a college. Technically, it's Dartmouth College, even though it's one of the Ivy League institutions in the US, which are the most prestigious institutions in the US. So the colleges have, like I said, a different feel, different structure. And I know some companies from the UK are hesitant to go to any higher ed institutions that don't say university on it because they think the interest level won't be the same or the structure won't be the same, but that's not the case at all. Colleges are definitely an area to look at. There's a massive number of students that are attending the two-year community colleges, which are typically, now again, talking about the political agendas, President Obama currently is looking at potentially putting a system into place where you can go to community college for free, which then would increase the number of students that you have going to higher ed because anybody that's restricted in terms of tuition costs, which again is a little bit different in terms of, I remember when I first started with UKTI, it was a big deal when tuitions were going up in the UK and there were all the protests that were going on here. And I remember looking at it and thinking, why are they complaining about tuition? I was like, this is nothing in comparison to what we had to pay. And I went to a state school and it was just obviously me being an American, not used to what was going on here. When you're going to higher education in the US, you're looking at, okay, we're having to pay thousands of dollars, even to go to a local community college that might be 5 miles from your home. You may still have to pay, over the course of the year, you still may have to pay $6,000 to $7,000 a year for that tuition. If you're looking at private four-year institutions, then you're looking at tens of thousands per year to go to school. So obviously, if they're going to put a community college program into place where they're going to take away tuition, that's going to make it much more attractive to the kids that are saying, hey, you know what, I have to work a job, or mom and dad have to get a second job, or have to take out loans or whatever just to send me to community college. Now, if it's free, now I can go and do that without having to worry about it. So that's obviously, like I said, that's going to change the dynamic. We'll see what happens if that's going to actually be something that's implemented, but it's interesting to see how that can further develop. So recommendations that I have, and they're going to trickle through slowly here. This can be in any case, no matter what you're working, what level you're going into. But some of the things that you might want to keep in mind, if you have, and again, think about this. This is not saying do all of them. It's some of these options can work. I've worked with companies that have done all of them in terms of establishing an office in the U.S. and they're working directly with schools. They have their own U.S. team that's got a relationship with the schools there, that they're doing everything on a regular basis. I've worked with other companies that are working with a reseller. If they have, so I apologize, I should just put reseller, not specifically software. For some of you that might have hardware, a reseller is still going to be relevant, or a distributor that you can work with that can be there. Partnering with an established U.S. company, that's one that I think is probably a little bit more attractive than a reseller or distributor because of the fact that when you're in that partnership, they're going to have more invested than that company that's got a catalog that's got thousands of products that they've been selling it on a regular basis, and they're just going to put you on page 40 with everything else. When you have a partner that's got that investment in your success, they're going to put the time in, they're going to put the effort in, they're going to have those existing relationships with the schools to actually say, oh, we have this new product that we're working with, and this is how we think it could be great for your school. Trade associations, I do think of all of these five, I think that's the one that could be probably the one I would emphasize the most, because you're sitting here, as I said before, your closest client is going to be 3,000 miles away. You need to be able to find out what's going on in the education space in the U.S. Trade associations can be a great way of doing that because it can provide you with networking opportunities with potential partners, with potential resellers. They can provide you with market information as to what's going on within the U.S. education space. They can provide you with different trends that are going on within education as well. And then attend the relevant trade shows, to which, unlike here in the UK where you have the tentpole events like BET, like the Education Show, in the US there are a few different events bouncing around the country. There's FETC, which is going on, if not this week, it's going on within the next couple of weeks in the US. There's South by Southwest EDU, plenty of them. I'm going to have my contact information at the end. Please feel free to shoot me an email. I have a PDF that lists a whole bunch of different events for you. Here's some of the key associations that I think can give you a nice understanding of what's going on in education. As I was talking before about the events, International Society for Technology and Education, I should have put in parentheses there, it's called ISTE. They have the big show that, to steal a line from a gentleman that spoke last year, ISTE is basically BET in a bigger venue but with less people, which is that's kind of how things go with the U.S. We've got the bigger venues, we've got more space, but logistically it's not as easy to get people from around the country to one central place. So ISTE does have an event that's very similar to BET in terms of their coverage. ISTE, yeah, so it's ISTE is their code. Again, like I said, at the end, my contact details will be on there where I'll be able to give you, send you the PDF for sure without a problem. But ISTE's event does tie in very closely around similar to what you've seen here, as well as they have some other seminars and sessions around the education space. There's also, like I said, South by Southwest EDU is coming up. If anybody's heard of South by Southwest, very popular in the interactive and the media space. They've got an education portion that's a growing event in the US that's one to be aware of. The SIIA, which is a Software and Information Industry Association, they've got a great event that I was at, that Freeman and I were at last month. That's a great event for networking and meeting potential companies to work with, meeting potential partners. They do a lot of different things in terms of raising profiles for startup companies and young companies that are coming up. So there's a trade show. I actually should have just gone to the next slide. So these are some of the other ones. CUE, Computer Using Educators. That's another event that can be, I should have put 2015. It's another annual event that's going to be coming up this year that, again, because of the fact that the size of the country and the level of schools. We're talking about over 125,000 schools, over 15,000 districts, over 4,000 higher ed institutions. Another event that's not up here, more for the higher ed side, is called EduCause. Another event that's tied around ed tech, but in the higher ed level and the higher ed space.